My name is Michael. I'm 30 years old. I've always thought of myself as a man who keeps his emotions under control. Not cold, not distant, but steady. I like to believe that reason guided me more than impulses ever could. That belief lasted until the day I boarded a train leaving London. The day everything I thought I knew about myself started to shatter. The station was crowded, a sea of travelers dragging suitcases, rushing between platforms, the air thick with the sound of announcements and the hiss of pulling in and out. I was already late. My shirt stuck slightly to my back from running, and my breath came too fast. I barely glanced at my ticket, just scanned the number, found a seat, and dropped into it with a sigh of relief. For a few precious seconds, I let the noise of the station blur into the background. My bag was under the seat, my jacket folded, my phone ready in my hand. I was safe, or so I thought. A soft sound, almost like a hesitant cough, broke my small bubble. I looked up, and in front of me stood a woman. Dark hair framed her face, falling in smooth waves to her shoulders. Her eyes, impossibly deep, like midnight rivers, met mine, and in that instant I forgot to breathe. "Excuse me," she said gently, with a smile that wasn't forced but natural, almost teasing. "But you're sitting in my seat." Confused, I blinked and glanced down at my ticket. The realization hit like a slap of embarrassment. I was in the wrong carriage. My instinct was to stammer an apology, grab my bag, and disappear before the flush on my cheeks betrayed me. But before I could even move, she lifted her hand slightly, a small gesture that froze me in place. "Stay here," she said, her voice carrying a calm warmth. "At least until the conductor comes by. There are empty seats, it doesn't matter." And just like that, a decision was made. I stayed. At that moment, I didn't know it was the beginning of something that would unravel every defense I had so carefully built. At first, we spoke the way strangers usually do, politely, carefully, with words that skimmed the surface. I asked if she traveled often, and she laughed softly, telling me she was constantly moving between cities for work. She asked about me, and I admitted that this was more of a spontaneous trip, an escape from the grind of routine, though I didn't use that word. Her accent was subtle, like a soft shadow at the edge of her sentences, and I found myself listening less to the meaning of her words and more to the melody of her voice. Every syllable seemed deliberate, unhurried, as if she wanted the conversation to linger. The train rattled steadily across the tracks, but for me, the space between us felt strangely still. Her hand rested lightly on the armrest, her fingers almost brushing against mine. I wasn't trying to notice, it just happened. And when my own hand shifted slightly closer, the touch was so brief it could have been accidental. Still, the shock of it sent a ripple through me like electricity. We laughed over small things, about how she once boarded the wrong train entirely and ended up in the countryside by accident, about my terrible sense of direction, which I freely admitted. With each shared laugh, it was as if the air grew warmer, denser. And then, just when I was ready to stand and surrender my seat as the conductor appeared down the aisle, she spoke again. Her eyes met mine with a quiet boldness. "We're together," she told the conductor simply, her lips curling into the faintest smile. I didn't correct her. He nodded and moved on without question, and I realized I was still sitting there, closer to her than I had any right to be, feeling something I couldn't quite explain. The train moved forward, but time seemed to stop. Once the conductor was gone, we didn't mention it again, her quiet declaration that we were together. It lingered in the space between us like an unspoken secret, too fragile to examine, yet too intoxicating to ignore. The hours rolled by, marked by stations flashing past outside the window. Yet inside our little pocket of the carriage, time dissolved. We traded fragments of our lives. She told me about her favorite cities, the kind of books she carried in her bag, the childhood memory that always made her laugh. I told her things I rarely admitted to anyone, like how I often felt the need to run away from my own routines, as though standing still might trap me forever. It surprised me how easy it was to speak to her. Normally, I guarded myself, measured my words, avoided vulnerability. But with her, the walls I had so carefully built seemed to crumble quietly, brick by brick, with every glance she gave me. Sometimes our conversation faded into silence. Not awkward silence, but the kind that hummed with meaning. She'd look out the window, and I'd steal glances at her profile, memorizing the curve of her jaw, the way her lips pressed together when she was thinking. And then she would turn back to me, as if she'd caught me staring, though she never called me out on it. Each time the train slowed at a station, a flicker of panic gripped me. Would this be the moment she stood up and walked away, vanishing into the crowd? But she never did. We stayed side by side, as though fate itself had tied us to those seats. By the time the final announcement came, I felt both dread and disbelief. The journey had lasted hours, yet it felt as if only minutes had passed. And then the strange coincidence revealed itself. We were both getting off at the same city. The train slowed, brakes screeching as the city came into view, rooftops stacked tightly together, lights glowing faintly through the early evening haze. I tried to steady myself, reminding my heart that this was just chance, that the moment would soon dissolve into memory. But fate seemed to disagree. As we stepped onto the platform, the crowd surged around us in hurried waves, but somehow we kept walking side by side. Neither of us said anything about it, as though speaking aloud might break the fragile spell. My bag felt heavier than it had on the train, but my chest felt impossibly light. She pulled out her phone to check directions. "My hotel isn't far from here," she murmured. I blinked. "Which one?" When she told me the name, I laughed, a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're kidding. That's my hotel, too." Her eyebrows lifted, the corners of her mouth curving slightly, but her eyes were unreadable. "Then perhaps the universe has a sense of humor," she said. I tried to play it off with a joke, something about fate acting like a clumsy travel agent. But deep down, a shiver of recognition passed through me. This was too much coincidence. The wrong seat, the hours together, now the same hotel. It felt orchestrated, though by what I couldn't say. We walked through the streets together, our suitcases rolling behind us, our shoulders brushing every so often. The city buzzed with life, neon signs flickering, laughter spilling from cafes, the scent of roasted chestnuts drifting in the air. Yet all I noticed was her, walking beside me with her dark hair catching the glow of streetlights. By the time we checked in at the reception desk, the sense of inevitability had grown stronger. The clerk handed me my key, then hers, and we discovered, with an almost surreal absurdity, that our rooms were only 2 doors apart. I turned to her, half smiling, half serious. "Looks like the universe isn't done with us yet." For the first time since meeting her, she didn't smile. Instead, she just looked at me, long, unblinking, as if she was weighing something important. And then, without a word, she nodded and walked toward the elevator. Evenings settled over the city like a velvet curtain, and the hotel lobby glowed with warm light. I had no plan, no expectation, but something in me refused to let the day end in silence. So after unpacking, after pacing the length of my room as if it were a cage, I found myself wandering back downstairs. The bar was quiet, almost hushed. A pianist played something soft and slow in the corner, the kind of music that makes time stretch. I ordered a glass of wine, more to occupy my hands than anything else. And then she appeared. Her hair was loose now, tumbling across her shoulders, and she wore a simple dress that made it impossible to look anywhere else. She spotted me immediately, as though she'd known I'd be here. Or perhaps I'd known she would come. "May I?" she asked, tilting her head toward the seat beside mine. I could only nod. We sat together, and the hours on the train seemed to echo into this new space, but with something sharper now, an intensity wrapped in candlelight and music. Our conversation was slower, fewer words, longer pauses. Every glance felt deliberate, every silence filled with things neither of us dared to say. At one point, she lowered her eyes, tracing the rim of her glass with a fingertip. "Do you always talk this easily with strangers?" she asked quietly. "No," I admitted. "Only with you." Her lips curved slightly, but her gaze remained lowered. For a moment, the world outside, the bustling city, the hotel guests passing through the lobby, vanished. There was only her and the growing pull between us. I don't remember every word we exchanged, but I remember the feeling, the way her laughter seemed to dissolve the air, the way her eyes lingered on mine, steady and unafraid. It was as if the universe itself had drawn a circle around us, and nothing beyond it mattered. And in that silence, heavy with unspoken truths, I knew the night was not going to end like an ordinary night. I wish I could say I hesitated, that I thought of reasons to keep my distance, but the truth is, I didn't. The moment was stronger than caution, stronger than logic, stronger even than the quiet voice inside me that usually kept me anchored. When she finally stood, it wasn't with ceremony or with words. She simply rose from her chair, her eyes locking with mine for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. And then she walked toward the elevator, leaving the faintest trace of her perfume in the air. I followed. Neither of us spoke as we stepped into the elevator. The soft hum of its movement was the only sound, punctuated by the muted thud of my heartbeat in my chest. She pressed the button for our floor, then leaned back, her arms folded loosely, her gaze fixed somewhere between me and the mirrored wall. The silence was thick, almost unbearable. When the doors opened, we walked side by side down the hallway. Our rooms, as fate had arranged, were only 2 doors apart. She stopped at hers. I stopped at mine. For a heartbeat, it felt like the end, a natural pause, a place to say goodnight. But she didn't say goodnight. Instead, she turned the key, pushed open the door, and looked back at me. Just one look, long and unwavering. An invitation, though no words were spoken. I stepped inside. The rest of that night is not something I can dress in neat sentences. It was a blur of touches, of whispers half lost to the dark, of lips that said more than words could. The walls of the room disappeared. The clock ceased to exist, and what was left was a space where nothing else mattered but her. For the first time in years, I felt unchained, as though borders had been erased. Between strangers and lovers, between present and past, between what I should be and what I was in that moment. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, painting the room with pale light, I knew everything had changed. The light in the room was thin and uncertain, the kind of pale dawn that makes everything look fragile. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The scent of her perfume clung faintly to the sheets, and beside me, she lay in silence, her hair scattered across the pillow, her breathing steady, her face turned slightly away from mine. I wanted to freeze that image, to lock it in memory forever. It wasn't passion I felt then, but something quieter, more dangerous. The weight of knowing I had crossed into a place I couldn't return from. When she stirred, opening her eyes slowly, she didn't smile. She simply looked at me, as though seeing me for the first time, as though searching for something in my expression. I couldn't tell if she found it. Neither of us spoke much. Words felt heavy, unnecessary. She rose from the bed, moving with a calmness that unsettled me. She dressed quickly, tying her hair back, slipping on her shoes. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching, waiting for something, a promise, a question, even a goodbye. But when she was ready, she simply stood at the door. Her hand lingered on the handle, her body half turned toward me. For a long moment, she stayed like that, caught between leaving and staying. And then, softly, she said, "Take care of yourself." No number, no name written down, no plan to meet again. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. I remained there for a long time, staring at the empty space she had left behind, feeling as though the night had been both everything and nothing at once. And yet, deep inside, I already knew this wasn't something I could let go of so easily. The rest of that morning felt unreal, as if I were drifting through a city that no longer had weight. I walked the streets aimlessly, past cafes and bookstores, past people rushing to work or lingering with coffee cups in hand. Their lives seemed anchored, purposeful. Mine felt suspended, caught in the echo of a night that had already slipped away. Everywhere I went, I kept expecting to see her. At a corner table, laughing over breakfast. In a shop window, her reflection caught in the glass. On the opposite pavement, her dark hair moving with the wind. But it was never her. Only strangers who disappeared into the crowd as quickly as I noticed them. I tried to tell myself it was chance, nothing more. A mistake on a ticket, an accident of timing, a coincidence of hotels. A story for the future. That time I met a woman on a train. But the thought rang hollow. It didn't feel like a story. It felt like something unfinished. In the afternoon, I returned to the hotel lobby, half hoping, half dreading that she might appear. I sat there for almost an hour, pretending to read a newspaper I couldn't focus on. But she never came. Later, when I asked at the desk if she had checked out, the clerk only nodded. Early this morning. That simple sentence left me hollow. I went back to my room, but it no longer felt mine. The walls carried the memory of her laughter. The air still seemed touched by her perfume. And though she was gone, her presence clung stubbornly, refusing to leave with her. That night, I lay awake, listening to the distant hum of the city outside the window. And in the dark, I realized something that both frightened and exhilarated me. I wasn't searching for her by chance. I was already haunted. Days passed, but she never left me. Not her face, not her voice, not the quiet way she'd said, "Take care of yourself." It was absurd. We had shared only a handful of hours a single night. Yet she had carved herself into me with the precision of something inevitable. Back in London, routine waited for me. Emails, meetings, the endless rhythm of responsibilities. But I wasn't the same man who had boarded that train. My thoughts wandered constantly, slipping away from spreadsheets and deadlines to drift back to her. Every crowded platform became a place to scan for her eyes. Every cafe I passed, I checked the tables inside. The world felt full of possibilities that all led back to her, and full of disappointment when they didn't. At night, I dreamed of her. Sometimes the dream was simple. Us on that train again, laughing, the landscape rolling by. Other times, it was stranger. I would chase her through endless corridors or call her name into a crowd that never turned. I always woke with a hollow ache in my chest. I told no one. How could I explain it? Friends would have laughed, or worse, pitied me. They would have said I'd been swept up in a holiday fling, a fleeting distraction. But it wasn't that. It couldn't be that. The intensity was too sharp, too real. One evening, unable to bear the quiet weight of it any longer, I returned to the station. I stood on the platform where we had first stepped off together, watching trains arrive and depart. Grinding against rails filled the air, and with every arrival, I searched the faces that spilled out, absurdly hoping she might be among them. Of course, she wasn't. But as the crowd thinned, I caught myself whispering, "One day." The words surprised me, because they weren't a hope. They felt like a promise. Months have passed since that train ride, yet it feels as though I'm still sitting beside her, still caught in the orbit of her gaze. Life has resumed its ordinary shape on the surface. Work, errands, familiar streets. But underneath, everything has changed. Because now, every journey begins with a question. Whenever I step onto a train, I scan the seats as if she might be there, waiting as if fate could be reckless enough to let it happen twice. When I check into a hotel, I listen for footsteps in the corridor, half believing I'll hear her door click open. In every crowd, I search for those dark eyes that once held me captive in silence. I know it's irrational, perhaps even foolish. But control, the thing I once valued above all else, has slipped from my grasp. She shattered it with nothing more than a smile, a gesture, a night where borders didn't exist. And though she left without a trace, she took something with her. The part of me that believed love could be managed, contained, explained. Now, I live with the echo of her, a ghost not of absence, but of possibility. The thought that somewhere, right now, she is boarding another train, choosing another seat, maybe glancing at the stranger beside her with that same quiet smile. And yet, despite the ache, despite the uncertainty, I wouldn't undo it. Because for those hours, on a train, in a hotel, in a night that felt endless, I touched something rare. Something forbidden and necessary all at once. So I keep searching. In stations, in cities, in the fleeting faces of strangers. Not because I'm certain I'll find her again, but because I know I'll never stop hoping. And maybe, just maybe, the universe isn't finished with us yet.